Welcome to the Com Analytics channel. This is Boris Tizenhausen. Today we have the 16th of August, a lot of important news. In this issue, who used whom in Alaska? Humiliation of the US or a major breakthrough in negotiations? What will Volodymyr Zelensky be offered on Monday in Washington? And also the emergency meeting of ambassadors from all 27 European Union countries and their joint statement. Trump's change in rhetoric, now he wants to end the war immediately. All this and more in today's episode. If this is your first time on this channel, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. Let's get into it. I think you've all seen it without me, but I'd like to highlight a few points. Putin was given the illusion that he could once again return to all the world summits, stand in the center of every photo, surrounded by world leaders. Well, in general, did you see how happily he was skipping along that red carpet? Trump played on the most sensitive nerve in Putin's complex about not being recognized as great. He thought that by seizing Crimea in 2014, everyone would acknowledge the great conqueror Vladimir Putin-Donsky. But it turned out to be the opposite. They started canceling him quietly at first, and then not so quietly. They didn't want to admit that he was great. So, in order to attract attention and go down in history, he decided to attack Ukraine, as if to say, "I'll show you yet, you'll hear about me again." Remember in Kapitoshka, that line, "So that everyone would be afraid, so that no one would laugh at me." It's exactly the same thing. And the plan was completely real. To attack Ukraine, quickly seize it, and then, after some time using propaganda, to move forward, using Ukrainians themselves to conquer Moldova, and then wherever else they could reach. Very simple. Everything seemed perfect. But here, perhaps more than ever, the phrase, "they picked the wrong target," is appropriate. But Trump, after all, wanted to get something in return as well. It was supposed to be a triumph for both of them, not just one. And of course, Trump overestimated his own abilities. He never understood that with a maniac, only brute force works. Putin got what he wanted, Trump did not. This Kremlin lackey flew in, strutted down the red carpet, took a photo with Trump, showed the whole world that there was actually no isolation, waved goodbye, and flew away. Yes, he missed out on lunch. Well, no big deal. That's it. He was pulled out of that swamp of isolation. By the way, the US Air Force planes that flew over Putin's head made him noticeably nervous. I don't know whether Trump planned to scare him or on the contrary to show that he was very happy to see Putin, so they flew over with that strategic bomber and fighter jets. Well, just take a look at this video. The thing is, Trump personally gave the order to eliminate General Soleimani at the time. He was eliminated on Iraqi territory. Let me remind you, he was the second most important person in Iran, the head of the Quds force. Well, in general, Putin was very outraged by this. He even said in one of his speeches, "Have they lost their minds over there?" So that's when these planes suddenly appeared. And for Putin, it really was unexpected, because he still remembers that it was Trump who took out Soleimani with a drone. What if something happens? Of course, Trump was standing right next to him, but you could see that this 1.5-meter tall conqueror was clearly frightened. And after all, Putin himself has practiced similar things in the past. Remember Merkel and his Labrador Coney? Knowing that Merkel was afraid of dogs, he deliberately brought the Labrador, and during the meeting between Putin and Merkel, the dog put its head on Merkel's lap. She just sat there, frozen. So Putin has pulled off tricks like that himself, but I think in this case, it was Trump who showed exactly how they were going to greet him. And American military personnel rolling out the red carpet for an internationally recognized murderer and kidnapper of Ukrainian children, that's really something. From the standpoint of morality, principles, justice, international law, and basic humanity, this is just utter madness. It looked, well, as if it was some kind of dream. This just can't be real. However, if we didn't have principles, morals, empathy, or a conscience, this meeting would seem logical to us. Sometimes it seems to me that Donald Trump acts, like a computer that simply needs to solve a task, to find the shortest route from point A to point B for a train. And it doesn't matter whether there are people lying somewhere on the rails or not, he won't look for a way to go around people. He will look for the shortest route, no matter how long the route is. It means there are people lying on the rails. All. It was said, "Find a solution. I will find it." Who's there? What's there? Emotions, loss of life. I don't care. However, this time he miscalculated. No deal, Trump declared. I think he himself was surprised by how things turned out. But everything was ready. Now, the main thing is to understand whether he intends to impose sanctions or not. In general, at some point, maybe in a week, maybe in two, because he was simply, well, a little bit played for a fool, as Putin likes to say. They tricked him, screwed him over. Right in front of the whole world, someone made him confident that he would get this deal. Otherwise, I think all this embarrassment with the red carpets and Boeing wouldn't have happened. And Trump himself answered this question about sanctions. I don't plan to impose sanctions against Russia yet, because the meeting with Putin went well. Trump said he might think about it in 2 or 3 weeks. And I wonder, who bit him, I wonder? Some media outlets reported that during this period, before the meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky, which we'll get to a bit later, as he's supposed to visit Washington on Monday, there won't be any shelling, or at least for these 2 or 3 weeks, there shouldn't be any massive shelling of Ukraine. But again, we know very well who we're dealing with. So, who did well at this event? Well, there are several categories of people who did well. First of all, Melania Trump. She handed Putin a personal letter about the abducted Ukrainian children. Reuters reported this. President Trump personally handed it over during the summit. The contents have not been disclosed, but it is known that it concerned the abduction of children as a result of the war. And just think about it. He knows there's a warrant out for him precisely for the abduction of children. He knows that Trump's position is just barely not calling him a terrorist or anything else, just so the negotiations don't fall apart. Smile, roll out the red carpet, and so on. And she hands him the letter. I understand that there's probably a specific list of names in there. Bring the children home, return the children to their families. But that's a very powerful act. Just like Melania Trump also played one of the key roles back then when Trump was going around saying, "Oh, I had a great talk with Putin again." And she says, "Oh, really? Well, look, he's bombing Ukrainian cities again." Remember, Trump himself talked about this. So she really did a great job. The people of Alaska also did a great job, as I mentioned yesterday and showed in the video. They came out with signs and Ukrainian flags and reminded the ghoul that he is a ghoul, nothing else. A murderer, a terrorist, and a ghoul. And also credit to those journalists who asked questions. Remember, they had to shout out about the killing of civilians and even made Putin pull some ridiculous faces. This is a sign that at that moment he lost control of himself, his facial expressions, and started making those weird old man grimaces. By the way, the journalists who asked about the killing of civilians were kicked out of the hall. Pretty much everything went differently than planned. At first, they were supposed to meet one-on-one, just the two of them with translators. But instead it was 3-on-3. I don't know why they changed the plans. Then there were supposed to be expanded teams and lunch, but there was no lunch at all. There was supposed to be a press conference, a kind of victory briefing with both presidents participating. In the end, it lasted only 12 minutes. No one really asked any questions. And that was it. So much for your briefing. Also, Putin never publicly confirmed that he was planning to meet or could meet with Volodymyr Zelensky. Trump was actually laying the groundwork for the next trilateral meeting. So that's how it is. The minimum plan, the whole reason for all of this, the ceasefire, wasn't achieved either. But Trump changed. He said, "Yes, now I have a new fixation." We'll get to that in a moment as well. No ceasefire at all. And Trump said he wouldn't be satisfied unless he achieved at least this minimum plan, a ceasefire. So then the question arises, what was the point of all this? Was it worth all that aviation fuel used to fly the planes? Let me remind you, they even flew in the motorcade vehicles by plane. Huge amounts of money were spent to bring all that over. Tons of secret agents and so on and so forth. Was it really worth it? To come, stand around awkwardly for 12 minutes, and then take turns giving statements. All of this could have been done over the phone. That's the question right there. And then there's the reaction from Western media. For example, some obviously pro-democratic outlets like CNN called the meeting unproductive. The BBC called it a humiliation for the US. Well, that's exactly how it looked. That's exactly how it looked. Putin was the one who benefited from this meeting. Yes, Next, it's possible that Putin will agree to meet with Zelensky, and then, or rather, even now, this is already being called a major breakthrough. Who? Lindsey Graham? He made an interesting statement there. We'll get to that as well. And Trump said that Putin doesn't want a ceasefire, but wants a final deal right away. Well then, by the way, CNN writes that Putin actually scored 2 great victories, meaning an extraordinary form of reputation restoration for a war criminal. And yes, thank you CNN for writing that. For many Ukrainians, this was a horrific sight. What was even more jarring was that he once again called us brotherly peoples, despite having killed our fellow citizens for years. And the second victory is that Putin has gained time to advance his troops on the front. But it's also unclear whether Trump will impose sanctions in 2 or 3 weeks or not. Well, look, for me it became very, all right, I won't say anything. In this case, with Donald Trump, there really can't be any surprises at all. He himself is a man of surprises. What was Trump counting on? I mean, I thought that since the Russians had already announced the final press conference and, they're flying in and all the delegations have been announced, I thought, well, there must already be an agreement. So they're just flying in to formalize it, to come out and say, Trump will say, I helped make this happen. Putin will thank Trump and we'll all look good too. So it was supposed to be a win-win, a double triumph. But what were they counting on? So, does that mean there was no agreement? Or maybe what? Witkoff misunderstood something again? He came in and said, everything's great, we're flying to Alaska, everything's settled. But in the end, really, nothing. No agreements at all. Or maybe Trump just believed too much in his own superpowers, I don't know. I think Donald Trump gets a selection of the world press and headlines. And today, I don't think he'll be pleased. Although I'll tell you this, a narcissistic type surrounds himself not with people who can argue with him, but with those who, on the contrary, emphasize his greatness. So if you say things that aren't very pleasant, you're out. But if you're, excuse my French, a brown-noser, that's his best employee. That's how it works over there. So today, he'll probably be shown some flattering headlines. But I've looked around the world, and it's not that impressive. The British are writing that the symbolism and the show are just an outward display with no substance. And who else is there? Al Jazeera, Reuters, Associated Press are writing that there was no breakthrough, the summit ended without any concrete agreements. Well, basically, CBC and even Reuters are saying that for Ukraine, the outlook is that Trump might shift the blame onto Zelensky and put the initiative on Zelensky. So basically, he'll say it's him who doesn't want to give up his 4 regions, that's it. And what about me? I've done everything I could, I'm great. Well, that would be very much in Donald Trump's style. And, well, it's worth mentioning that he arrived. I said in yesterday's episode that if the Valam one shows up, that tired, dejected old man who's just fed up with everything. If that one shows up, then most likely, yes, that's it. Some kind of chubby, big-headed version showed up. Honestly, it was like a Chupa Chups with a giant head. The cheeks were just, I don't even know, I don't think they've ever been that big before. Just take, yeah, honestly, it doesn't really matter which one showed up, whether it was that one, this one, whether the real one disappeared or not, whether he's in the freezer or not. It doesn't matter. Putin is, if you like, an avatar of Russia. That is, he's simply the collective image of the majority of the population of the Russian Federation. I want to emphasize, of the majority, not everyone. But no matter how much Putin tries to cosplay as Hitler, he'll still remain a sort of half-Hitler, a wannabe Hitler, because Wehrmacht soldiers never received the crazy money that is now being paid in Russia for participating in the so-called special military operation. Hitler infected Germany with ideas. Well, there were many factors: resentment, loss of territory, the Treaty of Versailles, the crisis, and so on. But he did infect them, and I read a collection of Wehrmacht soldiers' letters. They wrote things like, yes, we are for Germany, we are going to fight the Bolshevik evil, and so on and so forth. Putin did not infect anyone. That is, yes, the toothless, or, for those who are wealthier, gold-toothed Russians will scream their heads off for Putin in their filthy kitchens. But to go die for him for free, infected by some idea, no, sorry, that's not going to happen. And they have to, let me remind you, they have to keep raising these payments, constantly increasing them, because even for big money, people don't want to go anymore. They have to offer very large sums. By the way, Hitler also promised to make Germany great again after the humiliating as it was considered Treaty of Versailles of 1919, to restore Germany's former greatness. Why is everyone so drawn to former greatness? And here's literally some news from Donald Trump, what I was talking about. We have decided that we need to end the war, not establish a temporary truce, Trump tells us. You just said you would demand a ceasefire. We have decided. It was Putin who decided. And now Trump is repeating his talking points. This is exactly what we talked about in the last program. Right before this meeting, whoever Trump speaks to last, he repeats that person's talking points. We have decided. He doesn't even realize that this idea was planted in his head by Putin, and he's ready to abandon his previous stance. I will demand a ceasefire. We're abandoning that. That's what I said. No? Next question. Earlier, Trump stated that if Putin does not cease fire, sanctions will be imposed. It's really unfortunate that there are no value-based guidelines or a clear strategy. One day it's this way, the next day it's that way, I've changed everything, and the day after tomorrow it'll change again, as long as he gets the peace prize, and after that, who cares what happens? And here is Trump's full statement. We decided to end the war, not to establish a temporary truce. Take note of this. An excellent and successful day in Alaska. Of course. The meeting with Russian President Putin went very well, as did the late-night phone call with Ukrainian President Zelensky and various European leaders, including the NATO Secretary General. Everyone agreed that the best way to end this terrible war is to move toward a peace agreement. Well, President Zelensky will come to the Oval Office on Monday afternoon. If everything works out, we will schedule a meeting with Putin. Perhaps millions of lives will be saved, says Trump. We have decided. By the way, friends, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. It really helps with promotion. And when you like and comment, that helps too. So, well, everything is clear with this topic for now, but we'll come back to it. There will be 2 more important events. Here's just a news story I came across. This is so typical of Russia. Patriarch Kirill held a special prayer service before the start of any good deed, dedicated to the upcoming meeting between Trump and Putin. This was a special prayer service held on the eve of the meeting, and another similar service took place on Valam. And Patriarch Kirill believes that this meeting will bring hope and peace to all humanity, and will contribute to the development of comprehensive ties between the US and Russia. Well, in general, yeah. A cynical FSB rat. Let me remind you, it was he who called Putin's war a holy war. And by the way, the FSB-controlled Russian Orthodox Church played a significant role in normalizing and whitewashing Putin's crimes. Not just a significant role, if not one of the key roles. So this is an inside-out country. By the way, Putin's dream of bringing back the USSR, even if only within the territory of the Russian Federation, is coming true. I specifically looked it up. Lavrov, after all, was wearing a sweater with SS on it like this. He also had a vest on top and the letters SS remained, but it actually said USSR. And we were talking yesterday, like, what is it that draws them there to this warm, nostalgic USSR? Everything is free there, yes. That whole thing. Well, it's no big deal if someone snitched and ended up in the camps. Nothing terrible about it. Everything's great, it's poor, but at least it's cozy and no one's offended, and so on and so on. The state decides everything for you. Just absolutely everything. You're born and it decides where you study, where you live, where you work, when and where you go on vacation, and so on. A lot of people probably miss that, having everything decided for them. These are exactly the kind of incredibly infantile and immature characters who are accustomed to living with their dear mom forever, so that mommy consistently brings them this and that, providing for all their needs. I'm not judging. Although, who am I kidding? So yeah, I looked up what Putin said about the USSR. He said, anyone who doesn't regret the collapse of the Soviet Union has no heart. In 2005, he called the collapse of the USSR the greatest geopolitical catastrophe. Yeah. And in the documents, in the documentary film Russia, Recent History, that's from 2021, Putin said that the collapse of the USSR was a personal tragedy for him and the collapse of historical Russia. There you go. This is to understand what Putin considers to be the historical territories of the Russian Federation. So it's not just northern Kazakhstan and the east, or, well, maybe all of Ukraine, I don't know how he counts it, all the former Soviet republics. He said that the tragedy was the collapse of historical Russia. And then in 2025, in one of the fragments, in one of the interviews, he claimed that after the collapse of the USSR, the West began to ignore Russia's interests, setting up rules only for itself. And here's his ID fix, right? You'll hear about me yet, I'll show you, I'll remind you, I'll make it so that Russia will be treated the way the USSR once was. I think that was one of his main goals. Of course, there was a deep sense of resentment when Clinton, in response to the question, could Russia become a member of NATO, at first said yes, but then said no. Like, I talked it over with my team. No. So, resentment, resentment, resentment. For many Russians, this will probably come as a surprise, that Putin actually asked about the prospects of Russia joining NATO. How could that be? But there really was such a time. I think he came to believe in his own exceptional mission, that his historical role was to reunite what had fallen apart, to create a Soviet Union 2.0. But something went wrong. Ukraine ruined his plans. That's why he harbors such hatred. In other words, we ruined the plan of his life. And since he's already old, rotten, cowardly, and vile, the key word being old, he might not have it in him for another round. Maybe, his heels might just fall off already. This is clearly not what he envisioned, stealing a scorched piece of land from Ukraine. So he dreams about the USSR or its reincarnation. But you've already built a new modern Soviet Union on Russian territory. I mean, Lavrov definitely didn't come in that sweater for nothing. He's freed Russians, and now he'll finally free them from the internet and messengers, leaving just 3 Soviet newspapers, maybe 3 websites. I don't know if they'll even keep those. Just like in North Korea, there'll be KCNA, the Korean Central News Agency. There'll be just one website. That's it. You'll read everything from there. There'll be a state-owned messenger. Soon, rotary phones will make a comeback. He's revived the Gulag. Total informant culture. They haven't put up busts of Putin yet, but his portraits are already mandatory at all events in schools. The cult of personality is in full swing. There's a crowd of people shouting, Putin is the president of the world. There are those who hate the West, but they still take out loans to buy iPhones. It's like a carbon copy of the Soviet Union. Back then, people were willing to pay a fortune for jeans and tape recorders from the hated rotten West. Now, instead of calling someone an enemy of the people, they just call them a foreign agent, and that's it. Militarization of children starts in kindergarten. The young army, kids assembling drones in Alabuga, the external enemy in the form of bourgeois and capitalists, and, I don't know, even gay Satanists, has also been revived in the minds of the deep provinces. Everything's here, and even the Russian leadership by age alone is basically the old Politburo. That's it, congratulations. Mission accomplished. The Soviet Union has been rebuilt on the territory of the Russian Federation. Well, just a little bit left to go, literally. Orban was immediately delighted because he thinks Russian oil and gas will start flowing through the pipelines right away. He said the world has become safer. For years, we watched as the 2 largest nuclear powers destroyed the foundations of their cooperation, exchanging unfriendly messages. Now that has come to an end. Today the world is safer than it was yesterday. Let every weekend be at least as good as this one, he wrote on social network X. Hooray, hooray. Dobby now has 2 masters. Can you imagine how happy that is? Has the world become safer? The arms race is striding across the planet in 7-league boots. Everyone is arming themselves. Has the world become safer? Well, Orban is one thing. Whatever Orban was told, that's what he articulated. Look, here's an interesting piece of news I came across. Russian companies will start being fined for not having jobs available for war participants. They've started requiring regions, started requiring companies to reserve jobs for war participants, and now they're introducing fines for not having such quotas. Have you ever seen anything like this? Get ready to welcome into your so-called friendly family team, as they put it, ex-cons with multiple stints and experience handling weapons. Get ready. Not just get ready. There will be a quota. You'll be required to have at least one or several of them there. HR, those who do the hiring, need to urgently rewrite the corporate code of conduct. Instead of the question, where do you see yourself in our company in 5 years? It'll be like, so, here you have 2 chairs in front of you, right? On one, there are sharpened stakes. On the other, well, yeah, those who know. or like, let's make it a corporate thing. How do you properly pick up the soap at a company party? So that's it. Get ready for the new reality. By the way, here's another very interesting piece of news. The former director of the Patriot Park was sentenced to 5 years in prison for embezzling 25 million during the construction of a house and a bathhouse for Shoigu's deputy. This is the same Patriot Park where Russia's main military church, painted in khaki, is located. We've talked about it more than once, the one they planned with frescoes of Stalin. Sometimes you just read the news from Russia and think, no, that can't be real. But it can. That's the Russian Federation for you. So there you have it. That's what I was talking about. Lindsey Graham made a statement, the war will end before Christmas if Trump, Zelensky, and Putin meet, Lindsey Graham said. He said this on Fox News. And he called Putin's agreement to a trilateral meeting the breakthrough of the night. Haven't you heard? I haven't heard anywhere that Putin agreed. Well, actually, the Kremlin said that the issue of a trilateral meeting between Putin, Trump, and Zelensky was never on the agenda. Who should we believe? Of course, thanks to Lindsey Graham for his position and for co-authoring this sanctions bill, but there's one nuance. Oh, and yes, he also added something very, very important. He said that if everything falls through for Trump, then sanctions will be imposed against the Russian Federation. That's what we're thankful for. But let me emphasize again, things will only fall apart for Trump when he himself decides that everything has fallen apart. Even the most disastrous meeting he'll call a huge success. Absolutely fantastic. Give me another 3 weeks, then another meeting, and so on. Even if the whole world decides that everything has fallen apart, Donald Trump will come out and say that he had a great conversation with Putin and that Biden and Obama could never have had such a cool conversation in their lives. And today, an emergency meeting was convened with the ambassadors of all 27 member countries of the European Union to discuss further steps. So basically, before Zelensky's visit to Washington, the European Union wants to present its position. And by the way, this position has already been made public. A joint statement was released. So, we clearly understand that Ukraine must have reliable security guarantees in order to effectively defend its sovereignty and territorial integrity. We welcome President Trump's statement that the United States is ready to provide these security guarantees. Any coalition of the willing is prepared to play an active role. No restrictions should be imposed on Ukraine's armed forces or its cooperation with third countries. Russia cannot have a veto over Ukraine's path to the EU and NATO, according to the joint statement by the European Union and the United Kingdom. And decisions regarding its own territory should be made by Ukraine, while international borders